I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Ruebusch, joined once again by Patrick Wyman. And we're having a nice afternoon recording session here. Lovely fall weather out the window. Perfect time to talk about some face punching, wouldn't you say, partner?
It is hotter than shit here. It was 108 yesterday.
I suppose I should have checked that one off before I jumped in with my weather talk. It's not comfortable over there in California.
Yes, it was brutally hot yesterday. It's like 9. It was. I took Lucy for a walk this morning at like 7:30, and it was already 80 degrees by the time I got back, and it's humid too. Just like Jesus Christ, man! Like I thought it was supposed to be fall, but I had the strongest memory of a real estate agent back when I was moving back here in 2009 saying like, no, this is LA. You don't really need an air conditioner. No, man, fuck you. You do need an air conditioner.
Why isn't there a place in the world, Pat, that's just fall all year round? We got really summery places, we got really cold places. Where are all the places that are just constantly like 50s and 60s, kind of windy? That's
you
what I
just
want.
Described San Francisco, man.
Well, sounds like I'm moving to San Fran. That is my idea.
Nobody in the world can afford to move to San Francisco.
Well, sounds like I'm winning the lottery and then moving to San Fran.
Okay, I like where your head's at. Let's make that happen.
Good strategy. Speaking of strategy, Lena Landsberg probably had one for beating Chris Cyborg. Judging by Dominic Cruz's commentary, some of it seemed to be playing a little bit of the boxcar Bob or Homer Simpson and just kind of absorbing some damage early on. And that is a very difficult plan to make work against Cyborg. I think we saw kind of a different level of MMA experience and confidence here. And so kind of the main theme for the first part of our show is just going to be who can beat Cyborg, Justino.
Honestly, I don't think that there's a fighter out there who can do it. Like the combination of physicality and technical skill is just overwhelming. Like I would have thought that Landsberg could maybe get a little bit more done against Cyborg than she did, especially in the clinch. Like I thought Landsberg is a really good clinch fighter. She's very technical. She knows what she's doing on the inside. Like I just thought that she would be able to make more happen there, you know?
I thought she'd get something done.
Yeah, but I think that this was an object lesson here, that like there is no area where you're going to have sustained success against Cyborg, because even if you can somehow overcome the physical disadvantage, the technical skill that Cyborg has is overwhelming itself. Like, I mean, so think about it like this. Who are the most skilled clinch fighters that could conceivably fight Cyborg? Shevchenko and Rousey, right? Those would be the two options.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Shevchenko is going to be giving up 25 pounds to Cyborg. And while Shevchenko probably has a slight technical edge, there is no way that she could compete with somebody who's that much bigger with a technical gap that really is not that large.
Yeah.
You know, now Rousey is big enough that she wouldn't be giving up as much size. Like, let's remember, Rousey is only maybe giving up 10 pounds.
She was a featherweight for quite a while.
Yeah, she went to bantamweight, lest we forget, in order to avoid Cyborg.
Sure, as I would have done the same.
Yeah, but Rousey walks around at somewhere between 158 and 165. So she's giving up 10, 12 pounds at the very most. Mm-hmm. But despite her judo background, I don't think that the technical gap is that big. Like, I really think Cyborg could hold her own very easily in the clinch with Rousey.
Well, and like, let's not forget, Cyborg can play a similar kind of game to Holly Holm if she wants to. We saw her not fighting in the clinch, striking from long and middle distance, primarily against Leslie Smith, and she just had a blast taking Leslie Smith's head off in several small pieces. It's like it's the same reason that I wonder if Rousey can beat Amanda Nunes. That same kind of striking, just keeping a good base, moving between shots, and striking with power. And it makes me wonder. And so Well, let's talk about, before we look at what Rousey has to offer and what Shevchenko has to offer, maybe, I mean, who else is even at that goddamn division?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think for the right amount of money, Nunez could fight her. There's Kat Zingano, Juliana Pena. We could talk about Holly Holm.
And Nunez might
Um,
give her a very fun fight for 5 minutes.
mhm.
Um, there's always that question. That's the thing, though. Fighting is such a complicated sport because it's reliant on each single person is almost as unpredictable or as incomplete as a whole team of people. It's not that different from team sports, except that the win or a loss can come out of nowhere. And so you have a person, they have this amazing striking skill, but maybe they're not very good on the ground, or maybe they're really good skillfully everywhere, but they're not very strong, or maybe they're very strong, but they gas, or they're very strong, but they're over-aggressive, or they're not durable. There's all these different things that can go wrong. And Cyborg has a tremendous pairing of physical and technical attributes. She's very skilled, and I think getting better, though as we saw against Landsberg, she's not afraid to just cut loose and throw leather if she feels her opponent is breaking, which is fine. I think a fighter needs to have a bit of that. She's got really rapidly improving footwork. Her combination striking and head movement is getting better. And then she is just a physical specimen. She's incredibly strong. She's incredibly powerful. She seems to be able to take a shot pretty well. She's fast. So that allows her to make up for any areas where her skill might fail her. Her skill allows her to make up for any areas where physicality alone can't carry her. And so she is basically Mike Tyson. She's basically like young 20s Mike Tyson. Really strong, super powerful, and incredibly technical. And so what do you do to beat that kind of fighter? You gotta, basically somebody has to plan a way to ruin Cyborg Justino's life for her to start failing in the ring.
Yeah, well, and you know what's even more terrifying is the fact that, like, while we have not seen her super pressed, there's no reason to think that she has cardio issues either.
No, she
Like,
went 4 rounds quite recently with Marlos Kunin back in 2013.
yeah, there's no reason to think that, like, oh, if I can just make it out of the first couple of rounds, then she'll slow and
Yeah,
I'll be able to make hay in the later rounds. Like, there's no reason to think that.
yeah,
Like, she landed 84 strikes on Lena Landsberg in, what was it, like 8 minutes, 9 minutes?
something like that. Let's
Like,
see, it took her about 7.5 minutes to beat her.
that's a fucking insane pace to push.
Yeah,
And she didn't look tired. It didn't look like that was hard for her. She talked about her, not before this fight, but before her last fight. She talked about her cardio regimen, where she is out there running 7 or 8 miles a day. Like, she is in shape. She's physically dominant. She's exceptionally technically skilled. And it's not just that she's got these kinds of physical tools available to her and she's got this technical toolbox. It's that there's a perfect melding between them. Like, the way that she chooses to fight, the way that she has been trained to fight, perfectly matches what her physicality, it perfectly enhances her physicality, right? So if you hit super hard, let's find ways to keep you safe while you're out there hitting hard, and to allow you to throw lots of punches.
yeah,
Like, so how do you do that? You work on your footwork, you work on your base, you work on your fundamentals, right? And that's what Jason Perillo has done for her. Like,
yeah.
same thing that Perillo has done for Bisping. Is something we'll probably talk about next week. That Perillo hasn't changed what Bisping has done well. He's just maximized it, right? Like, Bisping has always been a quick-paced striker. Well, he has made Bisping more of an attritive striker and a more fundamentally sound one who gets hit less.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned that last week with Joe Louis, and I can't even recall what call I had to bring that up. But when Joe Louis came to Jack Blackburn, who was his trainer throughout his career, Jack, and this is a similar story to when Manny Pacquiao came to Freddie Roach, although those are obviously two very different fighters in size and attributes. But Jack Blackburn had Joe Louis, and he felt him hit, and he's like, all right, this kid hits hard. We're going to build his style around making that as effective a natural ability as possible. And it seems like that is what Perillo is now doing with Cyborg. He is not molding her into a different fighter, really. He's making her a better version of the fighter she was. She's more capable of being aggressive, more capable of landing punches, because now she's more frequently in position to land those punches. She's rarely off balance, which allows her to avoid punishment, which allows her to stay in range more often. So it's just a really nice refinement that we've seen with Cyborg that's turned her into the fighter she is today. Do you see any chinks in the cybernetic armor, Patrick Wyman?
Not really, to be honest. I think that you could, if you could make her chase, then you might have a shot. You might be able to wear her down. You might be able to make her work hard enough that perhaps you could do get some work done in the later rounds. But I'm not. But you're still going to get hit. You're still going to have to eat her power over time, and I don't know how that's going to work out.
I have to assume that Cyborg is still at her least comfortable on her back. It is the one position in which she has spent the least amount of time throughout her career. And unfortunately for potential opponents, either at 145, 140, or 135, there are not many women who possess the skill set necessary to put Cyborg there without having first to go through the clinch. You know, that's the problem for Ronda Rousey, is she would have to clinch with Cyborg, and Cyborg's good there. She's dangerous with her strikes. She's very stable. She's not easy to take down. And she's incredibly physically strong. Basically, tying up with her it allows her more time to set up, and it gives her a physical advantage. So the way to take a fighter like that down is probably with a reactive shot at the legs, and there aren't very many female fighters in any division who do that all that well. Female wrestling doesn't have much of an extensive background.
Yeah, I mean, you might think Miesha Tate probably could game plan, but I think she's so physically to do that. But I think she's so physically overmatched that would not be a particularly competitive.
She'd probably
fight.
go out there and trade punches before she realized she had to do what she was supposed to do. So
yeah, I mean, I think Juliana Pena probably has probably could make it happen, but again, I think she would be so overmatched in the striking that I don't think she could set up her shots. Like I think Cyborg could very intentionally walk her down with her jab and her kicks. And force Pena to try to shoot those reactive shots from too far away. Because that's kind of the problem, right? Like, to make a reactive shot work, you have to bait your opponent in far enough before you change levels to get the clean shot. And the problem when you have somebody who works their way in responsibly the way that Cyborg does is they don't overextend. They don't give you that clean shot because they're just a couple inches too far away for you to get all the way in. Yeah. They're just far enough away that when you change levels to shoot that to shoot that reactive takedown, they have enough time to get an underhook. Like that's the genius of what Anthony Johnson has done. We saw this really clearly against Phil Davis, but even against Daniel Cormier when he fought him, Rumble was not easy to take down because when you don't overextend, when you're not trying to come forward too aggressively, when you're doing it responsibly, it's really hard to get that to get the space that you need for the reactive shot.
Yeah, so the level of skill that a person needs to hit reactive takedowns, of course, it goes up respective to the level of skill the striker coming after them has.
Yeah, exactly.
Except, well, I think there's even a bigger barrier because a takedown is always going to be slower than a punch. So at a certain point, you not only need more skill, you need to have been fighting more intelligently. You need to be leading the dance, as it were. You need to have the initiative and get the person to throw exactly when you want them to throw. It can't really be a reactive takedown. It has to be a proactive reactive takedown. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we saw that even when GSP was trying to do pure reactive takedowns against Nick Diaz, despite him being the drastically superior wrestler and much faster and much more explosive, if he was just a bit too far away, he still couldn't get them.
Yeah.
You know? So you have to be doing things to draw out the shot that you're going to counter. And that's very hard to do against somebody who's as responsible and as over her feet as Cyborg is. Yeah. She's not going to overextend and give that to you. And even then, even if you do get in on her hips are so freaking strong that it's not a guarantee that you're going to get her down at that point.
Yeah, it's certainly the best way, I think, because then you're not willingly tying up with her. You're probably going to end up in some tie-ups, and you have to be able to deal with that. But the reason I suggest a shot takedown sort of approach is that it allows you it's the closest thing to what a striker has to a counter strike. It's the closest thing you have to like a clean impact where you're not exchanging in any way.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with that. I think that is the correct thing. I think it's just going to be very hard to pull that off.
I don't think anyone near Cyborg's weight has it.
Like Sarah McMahon probably has the pure wrestling skills that if she could get in on her hips, she could take her down. But I think her setups aren't good enough to get her to the point where she would actually be in on the hips.
That's the thing, man. Like that's what I mean when I I guess it maybe sound like a non sequitur when I said how unpredictable and how weird fighting is as a sport, but I think Sarah McMahon's probably the one person who is strong enough and as good enough a wrestler to do that. Maybe Miesha Tate. And both of them are limited in ways that are extremely exploitable for Cyborg.
Yeah.
Sarah McMahon is way too uncomfortable on the feet. She is way too tentative against fighters. And I think she's really used to feeling like the bigger, more physical fighter. And when she doesn't, her confidence shuts down. And then Miesha Tate is way too reckless and kind of has to go through the Cowboy approach of learning through negative reinforcement. She has to be taught in a way that she has to go back to her game plan before she'll do it. And she will try to trade with anybody. And so
if McMahon got intimidated in there with somebody as physical as Amanda Nunes, how's she gonna react when she's in there with somebody like Cyborg?
Yeah.
So and I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, if you, God forbid, you shoot that shot on her, you give it your best shot, she stuffs that takedown, you get stood up, then you're in the clinch with her, you're screwed. I mean, so let's think about somebody who could do the opposite. Somebody who's not going to try to hit reactive takedowns, with somebody who's going to try and play keep away. Somebody like Holly Holm. How do you think that fight plays out, Connor?
I actually think that's a more interesting thing because while I think that's probably a less certain way of beating Cyborg because you're not really taking her out of her element, it's an option that I think more women are capable of doing. I think Shevchenko and Holm could both do a bit of that. The problem is that as we saw in the fight with Landsberg, Lena wanted to stay away at certain points. She wanted to move, and it was almost funny. I was watching the fight and listening to the commentary, and Dominic Cruz is saying, "Oh, like this is what Lena wants to do. She wants to make her chase after her and give her some feints without running into the cage." And as he was saying the final part of that sentence, Elena Landsberg's back hit the cage. You need to have good footwork. You need to be very disciplined and confident to make that kind of footwork work. And we've talked about this a lot on the show before, but there is a very real difference between simple lateral movement, just kind of hopping side to side, that sort of skip or hop step you see a lot of fighters do. That's something you do when you have space already. When you have a pressure fighter on you who doesn't give you that space, your defensive footwork needs to be as tight, if not tighter, than their pressuring footwork. You need to outmaneuver them. And you're not going to do that by just dancing around the edge of the cage because they are closer to the center and they have a smaller perimeter to travel than you. So for every 1.5 steps you take, they only have to take 1. And so they're going to get less tired, they're going to be able to stay close to you, and they're going to be able to cut off your escape more quickly, unless you're way faster than them. And so you need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to step in and close the distance. You need to be able to kind of bump the kind of stuff that Dominic Cruz does. You might want to be able to change stances so that you can create sudden, unexpected angles. And you have to strike off of these. And I don't think Holly Holm is confident enough in the power in her hands or defensively savvy enough to play that kind of game. And I don't think Valentina Shevchenko throws enough to play that kind of game. I think both of them would eventually have the space cut off by Cyborg. And, if we think back on the boxing trinity, Swarmer, Boxer, Slugger, traditionally Swarmer beats Boxer. Swarmer, the pressure fighter, tends to beat the pure out fighter. You have to be more of a boxer puncher or something to beat them. You have to have some of that power. They say the Slugger beats the Swarmer because the Slugger can stand his or her ground and throw heat. And I don't think Shevchenko or Holly Holm are either confident enough or dangerous enough to do that with Cyborg. So once again, we come back to that horrible marriage of technical ability and imposing physicality. Who can match Cyborg so greatly in one of those that she can't fall back on the other, or who can match Cyborg equally in both? And I don't think there's anyone.
Yeah, so that's the really interesting kind of problem there. You talked about using the pocket and counter punches as a way of scaring off the Swarmer, and how that's a bad idea against Cyborg. But also, fighters like Holm and Shevchenko use the clinch as a safety blanket, right? That if your opponent comes too far in, then you can grab a hold, land a shot, create space and and get back to safety. But you can't do that against Cyborg because if you get tied up with her, then she's way more physically imposing than you are, especially against somebody like Shevchenko, who's a very small bantamweight. Really
Shevchenko's used to being smaller and more technical. Holm is used to being more physically imposing. I'm not sure that either of those will work against Chris Justino.
Yeah, I mean, Holm is giving up size and physicality probably for the first time in her career in that particular phase, in addition to technical skill. Whereas Shevchenko is giving up incredible amounts of size. So like, there's no safety blanket for them. If you want to play that kind of stick and move game, then you have to do so with no margin for error and the knowledge that the second that your distance is compromised, your ability to set a long range is compromised, you're in huge trouble. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's just no way that you can maintain that for more than a round or two, even if you have some success.
Yeah, and I think really maybe we should cap this discussion off by paying our respects to the many women now who have tried, to the 19 women who have tried to beat Chris Cyborg. I guess 18 since the first one did defeat her. Thing is, you can hear the kind of almost fearful reverence that we have when discussing her, and you can imagine how much more potent that feeling is for women who are actually scheduled to fight her. That's the reason a lot of people go in there and they see her resume, they see all the other women not just get beaten, but get dominated, and very often knocked out with ease. And so they're kind of beaten before they go in there. It'll take somebody who either has some of those physical or technical advantages, or really one of the most important things, it'll take somebody who doesn't have that kind of reverence for Cyborg. A lot of times, commentators call this respect. They have a lot of respect for each other, but sometimes with a fighter like Cyborg, who has that Mike Tyson vibe, it really does border on fear. Somebody who's not afraid of Cyborg is going to be the first person to have a real chance of beating her. And I don't know who that is, and I think that for that reason, the first person to beat Cyborg, if anyone does, before she retires, I think it may very well be someone who really surprises us, where we don't see it coming, because it's going to be someone who doesn't seem to have a chance at beating her, but who just doesn't care that they're fighting Cyborg. But like, you can't say who that's going to be. Like, you could not have picked Buster Douglas to be the one to beat Mike Tyson. You know, it's just, I think it'll probably come out of the blue. And so I'm just going to keep picking Cyborg until somebody proves me embarrassingly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's the best. I think she's the best fighter. She is the best marriage of physicality and technical skill in comparison to her opponents that we've seen, aside from maybe Jose Aldo.
Sure.
In terms of just absolutely, and Jose Aldo, John Jones, she's very much in that discussion and needs to be mentioned in that same breath.
Yeah.
Relative to her competition.
The same nature of dominance. Yeah, maybe. But and the thing is like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, you watch Cyborg fight and you're not like, oh, this is a woman. She's like, women's MMA is still developing. She looks like a good fighter by normal standards. You know, It's not like watching women's bantamweight and you're like, oh, another head and arm throw. You're like, why is this happening? Why is everything so underdeveloped? She looks like a professional modern mixed martial artist.
Yeah, she looks the way that strawweights are starting to look.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way that fighters, like when you look at somebody like Gedalia or Jędrzejczyk or Rose Namajunas or Karolina Kowalkiewicz, like you look at them and you're like, oh no, that's somebody who's been well trained by real coaches for their entire career, and that's exactly what Cyborg is.
Yeah, we said that way back when we talked about Jędrzejczyk Gedalia, how it didn't look like what some people might imagine when they think of women's MMA. It looked like MMA. It looked like good MMA. And that I think Brian Stan said the same thing. Like, the level of technique was really, really good in that fight, the level of strategy. And that's Cyborg. And unfortunately for her opponents, she's fighting women's bantamweights and featherweights, which, apart from her, the division is very shallow. And so there's not really anybody. It's basically, it is kind of like, I don't know, Ronda Rousey having to fight Dominic Cruz. Like, the level of training is very, very different for somebody like Cyborg, and it's evident in the way she fights. That she doesn't have these huge gaps in her game, or she doesn't make these really bad decisions. She's a big camp fighter with a lot of really valuable experience who is getting better and better, and is a physical beast. So,
Yeah,
What can you
I'm
do?
with all of that. I mean, speaking of, just real quick, one more thing before we move on. Did you see that picture of her standing next to Dominic Cruz?
Yes.
Holy shit. Like, how do you look at that and think, yeah, I want her to make 135 pounds?
Right.
Because Cruz is a huge fucking bantamweight.
Yeah.
Cruz's weight cut is brutal. That dude walks around at 160, 165.
I'm amazed she made 140. I think it's already harder for women to cut weight than it is for men. Just different body composition. I don't know how the hell she makes 140. Like, I don't know how she does that. I don't know how she apparently at one time tried to make a test cut to 135, and I think she may have made it, but really, like, that's going to screw her up. She's huge. Yeah. She's massive.
Dude, I can't imagine that weight cut. But
yeah.
At any rate, Chris Cyborg is fucking awesome. We here at Heavy Hands give her the heavy hand seal of approval. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah.
My God, cannot wait to see her fight again. Hopefully, she gets somebody who's maybe a little better known, a little bigger name.
Yeah. Although who that is, I can't say. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to take a little look at some of the fighters from next week's card, main evented, of course, by John Lineker and John Dodson. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back. It's only been about 2 minutes since the last segment, right, Pat? Something like that.
Yeah, and not an hour where I had to beg for some time to get something else done. Yes.
Smooth process. I always like that. You can listen to a podcast and it just, for all you know, it was all recorded. Everything's recorded like on schedule. In reality, most of the podcasts you listen to are like recorded in bulk in like a studio, and there's however much shit going on between takes. They're recorded in different segments. Ours is usually pretty smooth, but we took a nice little hiatus here in the midst of our recording session today. I got to lounge around. I was supposed to be doing work, but I also watched some Lord of the Rings behind the scenes on YouTube, so I was very productive with my time.
That sounds very productive.
Yeah, I learned a lot about the making of Lord of the Rings. So now that we're back, I want to talk about the two fights really that pique my interest most on next week's card. They're calling this one UFC Fight Night 96. I suppose you could also call it UFC Portland, and most people will probably just go around calling it UFC Lineker versus Dodson. And that clues you in as to one of the fights I want to discuss. That's the bantamweight, I guess we can call it a contenders matchup between John Lineker, John Dodson, two former flyweights. One of them, I guess, just didn't feel like he had a future in that division, that being John Dodson, after two failed bids at the title. And then John Lineker probably would have had a future in that division if he would have been able to make the weight. I think despite being a flyweight for, let's recount his UFC career very quickly. His first UFC flyweight fight was in 2012, and he missed weight in that debut and 3 other times. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just 8 UFC flyweight bouts and missed weight in 4 of them.
That's
not good. The kind of unprofessionalism that can make you hurt your feelings towards a fighter. It's a lot easier to forgive Lineker now that he has moved up to bantamweight. And I think his move is very strong evidence that weight cutting maybe isn't as crucially important as a lot of fighters think it is relative to technical ability and everything, because he has been on a tear at 135 pounds. 3 straight wins, 2 of them knockouts, one a very dominant performance over someone who was in some ways a bit of at least a sort of stifling style matchup for him, that being Rob Font. He absolutely savaged Michael McDonald in his last fight. And so let's talk about
the really interesting thing about Lineker moving up here is that he fought 3 of the biggest guys in that division.
Sure, yeah.
Rivera is 5'9", McDonald is 5'9", and Font I think is 5'8". So he fought 3 huge bantamweights. Now, mind you, none of those guys really tried to use that size all that effectively, or they tried to stick him on the end of their reach and couldn't do it. But nobody has really tried to get inside and bully him yet. So maybe if he fights one of the bigger bantamweights who can use that physicality, something like Aljamain Sterling, like that could be a real problem for him, but it hasn't so far.
Yeah, Dominic Cruz for sure. I enjoyed getting into a battle with you and some other John Lineker stalwarts about Dominic Cruz just obliterating.
Nobody is saying that Lineker beats Cruz.
No, it was really just me having fun by pissing on the fun.
Ah, you shithead.
Nobody's saying that he'll beat for Cruz, and for good reason, because very few people would beat Cruz. But now, weirdly, back at bantamweight, he fights not only someone else who is known for their punching power, but another person who was actually kind of small in stature for the flyweight division. John Dodson is the same height as Lineker, 5'3", and why don't we take an opportunity, Pat, to talk about John Dodson, because we both have a feeling about him.
Yeah.
I can lead this if you don't want to be sound like a jerk.
I think that it's fair to say that neither you nor I are big fans of John Dodson's game. I think because at heart, you and I both approach fighting pretty systematically and pretty analytically. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time that does not help you enjoy or understand what John Dodson is doing in the cage.
Yes.
Because he's so athletic, so fast, so powerful. There is not really a process to what he does. Like, he is almost a processless, rhythmless fighter where one thing that he does not seem to lead logically into the next thing, but it still somehow works, which is maddening for people like us who want to see underlying patterns and reasons why. Like, he's the kind of fighter who, despite the incredible, unbelievable things that he's capable of doing, it's almost like nails on a chalkboard to me.
Yeah, it's understanding something, feeling like you understand why something is happening, I think is the most satisfying way to enjoy it. When I'm really blown away by something in a fight, it's when I've gotten the chance to like watch a slow motion sequence a few times, and I just see all of these little subtle nuances going on. And that's what blows me away, is I can see this person doing what seems like executing a beautiful plan at just like the speed of light. And that is what blows me away, because I understand what's going on. In the same way that, you probably wouldn't understand abstract art. You would probably find abstract art frustrating if you don't understand what the artist is going for, or have a contextual knowledge of the field. You would find reading something like Ulysses frustrating if you don't have a context for like stream of consciousness and modern literary fiction. I think I probably would find both of those things frustrating, because I don't know that much about either of them enough to enjoy them. And so John Dodson is like abstract art, like he produces some spectacular results. He has some really impressive abilities, but I just can't. He is totally dynamism without process. He is totally on that side of the scale, and I find that to be quite frustrating to watch, because and I think other people do too. Other people, I think, are more forgiving of stuff like that because of some of the spectacular performances. But when I see, for me, it feels like fights like the Zach Makovsky fight are what I expect from John Dodson.
Yeah, I agree with that. I fundamentally agree with that.
I'm not sure if that's fair, because most people, I think of him as like this exciting, fast knockout puncher. And that, of course, is great. But for some reason, when I watch John Dodson, I'm expecting like 8 minutes of Zach Makovsky Dodson versus Makovsky before a knockout happens.
Yeah, or the Jussier Formiga fight a few years ago, which was just dreadful to watch before a kind of out of nowhere knockout.
Yeah, sure.
Like, that to me is what Dodson does. And I think the really maddening thing is that on some level, both you and I think that if he were more process driven, he could knock out more fighters.
Yeah,
that's the maddening thing about it. It's not that like he's not doing very much, or he's not scoring points, or like process for the sake of process. It's that if he approached things maybe more systematically, like less of an abstract artist and more like Bob Ross, then he would produce more. Like,
yeah, Bob Ross put out a shitload of paintings. That is for damn sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Bob Ross enthusiast. Shouts to my coworker Scott Harris, who is literally the expert on Bob Ross. Like,
And like Bob Ross, if John Dodson had more process, he would be able to lull more people to sleep.
yeah, like he does to me every night. I fall asleep every night
Yeah.
watching Bob
For
Ross.
John Dodson's
Um,
version of putting you to sleep would be a little more violent, but the end
maybe a
result
bit.
is very similar.
Well, yeah, I mean, so this is not to say that we're like hating on John Dodson. It's just that there are very specific buttons for both you and I that he
Yeah.
presses that are almost irrationally unpleasant for us.
Yeah, yeah, this
Like,
maybe isn't the best kind of analysis. This is like us talking about our personal feelings for what we like to see in combat sports.
yeah. So, I mean, now with all of that said, that doesn't mean that he's going to lose this fight. It doesn't make him a bad fighter.
No, of
It
course not.
doesn't, and it doesn't mean that he's going to lose this fight. But I think that if he wins this fight, which is a distinct possibility, it will be an unexciting performance, an unexciting fight, or he has to do his best to make it unexciting.
Why do you say that?
Because I think that how Dodson wins this fight is by circling and circling and circling and sticking and moving and limiting the number of exchanges, exchanging only on his exchanging only on his terms. Whereas for Lineker to win, Lineker needs to bait Dodson into thinking that he's more hittable than he is, and getting him to stick around for that extra punch instead of immediately getting out of range.
Sure, yeah. I think there are two things you can do to stop John Lineker coming after you. One is to knock him out or finish him in some way, and two is to frustrate him. And I think a lot of fighters get into a headspace with a guy like John Lineker where they kind of become frightened or they become anxious, and so then they try to put that feeling on John Lineker. They feel pressured, and so they're like, I'm going to scare him off. And that doesn't work. I think for a guy with John Lineker's mentality, I think that actually emboldens him to attack more, because he knows that when his other guys start to he can sense when they start to lose their composure, they start swinging, they start trying to hit him with a big shot just so he'll leave them alone for a little bit. He knows they're about to break, and so he presses more. And that's why when Francisco Rivera started doing that, he just started trading with him. Because for John Lineker, I think that's what he wants. Is he wants someone to expose themselves to his shots. He wants someone to lose their cool and exhaust themselves. And he has confidence in his ability to continue delivering punishment after they no longer can, or after they've lost faith in their ability to do so. And so the alternative to trying to scare him is trying to frustrate him. Taking the fight out of the fight is one phrase. I think that's what something. I think I got that from Bernard Hopkins. But sort of making it into a game, like turning it into a game of tag, winning deliberately on points. And I think that's probably the most likely way for John Dodson to win. The other option then, of course, is knocking Lineker out, like really hurting him. Because most times opponents aren't able to hurt him, and they're too worried about him hurting them to do that. And so typically, as we said before, the outfighters don't do that well against pressure fighters because it makes them uncomfortable. But the outfighters who can punch, the boxer punchers, they have a much better chance. And I think that is John Dodson. So the question for me in this matchup is, can he frustrate John Lineker by moving a lot? Can he walk him into big shots and then be out before Lineker can get the exchange that he wants? Does he have the skill set and the discipline, I guess, to stick to that kind of approach?
Yeah, that's the real question here is, can he avoid the temptation of sticking around to land that one
Sure.
extra punch when Lineker is right there?
Because I feel like we know what John Lineker is going to do. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's not really any surprises about what kind of fight he's going to bring to the table. In a way, our frustration with John Dodson makes him more interesting because he's more unpredictable. You're not sure how he matches up with someone like Lineker. And we have to say that even as a flyweight, John Dodson was probably the fastest fighter in the UFC. Now, relative to bantamweights, especially one who's not particularly quick on his feet, like John Lineker, he's got to have a speed advantage.
Oh, absolutely. He's going to be the faster fighter. He's probably going to be shot for shot the harder hitter. He's got, I would say almost certainly better footwork. He can also wrestle when the mood strikes as a change of pace. Like, all of the tools are there for Dodson to win this fight. I think he's going to lose the fight, though. And I'll tell you why. Because I don't think he can resist the temptation to hit Lineker another time or two. Like, I think he's going to. I think for about 4 minutes, He's going to get in and out on angles. He's going to stay disciplined. He's going to do exactly what he has to do. He's going to hit a reactive takedown when Lineker comes forward too aggressively. But then he's going to think, I can hit this guy. I can get this guy out of there. He's going to try to land another shot in a flurry instead of landing one straight left and one right hook and exiting. He's going to say, well, but I can land another shot. And when he does, Lineker's going to hit him. And if he does that enough times, eventually Lineker's shots are going to pile up and they're going to slow him down. And I think that I am more confident that Lineker can take John Dodson's shots at the rate that John Dodson throws them than I am that Dodson can take Lineker's shots at the rate that he throws them without ill effect.
Yeah, how do you think Dodson's gas tank will look at 135? Because it was kind of questionable at flyweight, I think. It was not always great. I don't think it looked very good against Makovsky. It definitely didn't look good in the 2 fights with Demetrius Johnson. I feel like right now, even though he throws a lot more, I have a little more faith in Lineker's ability to go 5 rounds than I do John Dodson's. At least while keeping up something resembling the activity in the first round.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that Dodson's gas tank was questionable for good reason, but I think that even at 135 pounds, he's not going to want to work real fast. Like pace isn't just about gas tank; it's also about preference. And I think when Lineker is, or when Dodson is having his preferred kind of fight, it is a slow paced fight. He's a burst fighter, not a consistent kind of guy. And whereas I think that Lineker is the opposite. Lineker lands whenever he can possibly land and doesn't really get tired.
Yeah, there's no, like you said, he's kind of a rhythmless fighter. A lot of fighters get into a rhythm, which in one sense can make you an easier target because your opponent can time you. But if you understand your rhythm, you can break it to set the other person up. The other big thing is that being in a rhythm is what kind of allows you to go long distances. Runners have a rhythm. Runners have a pace that they fall into, and they know they can keep that pace going for a long, long time. And they can tell when their pace is off, and they can adjust and fall back to sort of their home pace, their trustworthy pace. And John Dodson doesn't seem to have that. Doesn't seem to have any kind of rhythm. So everything is like utter stillness and then bursts of movement. And so maybe everything, that dynamism that makes him so dangerous is also what makes him so frustrating, because maybe he feels that he can't do a lot of moving, that he can't put out more volume, that he can't be a more consistent fighter because he only knows how to execute movements in the most exhausting way possible, like all explosions, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You never see him tapping away and scoring points. You never see him establishing that baseline pace, that baseline rhythm. It's just not what he does. Like if he throws 20 strikes in a minute, it's going to be because he had a flurry where he threw 20 strikes. He's not going to throw a strike every 3 seconds, every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. Like that's not his jam. That's not what he does. Where Lineker, you look at him and you think, oh, he's also a burst fighter, but it's not quite the same thing because Lineker is always looking for opportunities to throw.
Yeah.
There is no opportunity to throw that John Lineker does not take.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, and that's the great strength of Lineker's game. That's why it works, is because he doesn't waste opportunities, because every time there's an opening, he's doing his level best to exploit it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's what I think the difference is here. Like, I think if you're going to beat a guy who is the quintessential burst fighter, the quintessential processless fighter, then you need to be able to exploit every opening that he gives you. You need to be able to slip in volume whenever possible. Dodson is a tremendously durable guy, a tremendously tough guy, and I don't think Lineker will knock him out, but I do think that he'll just land more. I don't think that Dodson can resist the temptation to hit Lineker, and I think if you're in there with Lineker, he can hit you back, and that's not where you want to be.
There also is the possibility that Dodson could use his wrestling to his advantage. I think he can hit some takedowns, though he very rarely does. But yeah, I'm pretty much with you on every step of this one, Pat. I think, I've been thinking a lot about that style trifecta a lot lately. I think it's been obvious on the show because I think I keep bringing it up. But I think traditionally this is a kind of matchup. If I had to categorize John Dodson, be like, all right, he likes to fight on the outside, and he hits pretty hard, and he's willing to exchange, probably boxer puncher. And if I had to categorize John Lineker, I'd say swarmer, pressure fighter. And the pressure fighter tends to beat the boxer, but the slugger tends to beat the pressure fighter. And the boxer puncher is kind of the mishmash of those two. He's kind of the boxer who can slug. And so that gives him a bit of an advantage, but in my head, and maybe this is my bias talking, it just doesn't feel like John Dodson can actually play that style consistently enough to beat a really tough fighter who pushes a consistent pace and keeps coming. I think I actually did pick him to knock Dodson out late, like a body shot KO or an attritive buildup of damage when Dodson starts to tire. If he does stop him, though, I think we're more or less on the same page. I don't see it happening until the 4th or 5th round. So that's what it is for me. Both of us liking John Lineker, which of course means that this will be the time he loses. Because I've been criticized for
it's
not...
probably going to be a first-round knockout.
Yeah, for not picking... Just like I'll probably pick Conor McGregor over Eddie Alvarez, and this will be the one time I pick Conor McGregor, and he doesn't goddamn win. So I just can't. I can't win with these big high-profile fight picks. When punchers are involved, everything's unpredictable. But that brings us to our next fight, the co-main event on this card, lightweight Will Brooks and Alex Cowboy Oliveira. Will Brooks, of course, the former Bellator lightweight champion, kind of won the title unimpressively over Michael Chandler, contentious decision, and then basically dominated him in their follow-up fight. Looked really solid in his debut against Ross Pearson, though I think it was a little more back and forth than a lot of us expected. Now he's taking on Alex Oliveira, who nominally is a lightweight, and he's listed by the UFC as a lightweight, but I think he has actually had more bouts take place at welterweight in his UFC career than he has at 155. Let's see. Yes, he's had 4 welterweight bouts and only 2 lightweight bouts, and he does not look out of place as a welterweight. And so I think that is really the narrative going into this fight. Is Will Brooks, who was one of the most skilled lightweights on the planet, skilled enough to overcome a less skilled but much more physically imposing fighter in Alex Oliveira?
Yeah, this is a really, really fascinating matchup because Oliveira is the more physically imposing fighter. He's probably a better athlete than Brooks is, despite Brooks being a really, really good athlete himself. They like to be in some of the same spaces. They like to do a lot of the same things. Actually, it's kind of weird how much they like to do some of the same things.
Yeah,
a lot of forward moving, stance switching combinations to move into the clinch. A lot of clinch entry counters to your opponent's forward movement. Really like to be tied up with the opponent in the clinch. A lot of actual combination striking in the clinch from both guys, like knees to elbows to punches. Brooks is sharper at it than Oliveira is. Really like to be on top, really physically imposing, dominating top games, nice moves to the back on the ground. The difference is that Oliveira is a little more physically imposing. Brooks is more technically skilled at everything. So It's one of those it's the kind of fight that Brooks could lose, where he's just physically overpowered, which is weird to say because he's such an imposing guy himself. But he probably wins because he's got skill edges pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I think I would actually say I think Oliveira is as superior physically as Brooks is skillfully. And I know Will Brooks is a phenomenal athlete, but not just in terms of strength and power, but size, length. I think he is only 1 inch taller, but he has, let's see, what's Wikipedia says, 6 inches more wingspan, very broad shoulders, very long arms, and I think he probably is a bit stronger. And if not the substantially harder hitter, he's certainly a more consistent finisher than Brooks with his striking. And so that to me is interesting because I think Brooks is not only a superb technician, but someone who is used to sort of out-athleting his opponents, at least in one arena. I think he's used to being either faster or more explosive or being the harder hitter. And I'm not sure that he's probably faster. But even then, Oliveira is surprisingly light in his feet for a guy his size. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how sort of the skill set of Will Brooks clashes, how his confidence, the confidence that backs up his skill set clashes with the imposing physicality of Alex Oliveira. My feeling is the same as yours, Pat. I do think he's probably more skilled. I think hitting reactive takedowns, he will have some success doing that, and particularly on the ground. I think his advantages are more pronounced. Oliveira has always struck me as a guy who's a lot more confident on the ground than he really has any right to be. He's had some very dominant performances on the ground, like in his last fight over James Muntasiri, but those are the kind of guys I think that bolster his confidence in his ground game when it's still not necessarily warranted, especially not against guys like Will Brooks. The level of technique for Alex Oliveira on the ground, he's a guy I think who really strikes me as someone who makes up for a lack of skill with physicality, rather than like Cyborg, like bolstering the one with the other.
There are specific things on the ground that Oliveira does really well. Like he's got really good transitions to the back. He's got a nice top ride. Like those are specific things that he does very well. His game is built around those specific things. The rest of it, there's a lot of gaps there. And we saw that when Oliveira fought Donald Cerrone, right? Like as soon as Cerrone put him on his back, Oliveira was in serious trouble. Yeah. And I think that a similar kind of thing is going to happen here. But I think that Brooks is going to have some trouble before he gets it to that point. Like Oliveira is so strong, just like the dude is one of the best athletes at fighting at 155 or 170. I am really struck by what a specimen he is.
And it is baffling that he can apparently easily make the lightweight limit. He doesn't seem to have that much trouble. He's huge. His frame he has that Conor McGregor frame, like really long limbs, thin torso, and very broad shoulders.
Well, apparently there was one fight where he was cutting from close to 200 pounds to make 155, which I don't understand at all.
It's madness.
Yeah, like it's ridiculous. But with all of that said, I think Brooks will find a way to get it done. I think he either takes a 29-28 decision or gets like a late submission win.
Yeah.
But like Brooks is a fascinating fighter because there are certain matchups like this where like he could go to a 29-28 decision with anybody in that division down to like the 25th or 30th best fighter.
Yes.
But also if you get him into a matchup with somebody like Edson Barboza where he can grab a hold of the clinch and slam him against the fence, like Brooks is going to beat the shit out of somebody like that, you know?
Like he can have a back and forth fight with Ross Pearson that's much closer than I thought it would be, but I wouldn't be shocked if he beat Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, it's a bizarre kind of thing, and we talked about this before his debut, like that but if you put him in a 5-round fight with somebody like Khabib, I think he probably beats Khabib in over 5 rounds.
Yeah,
like Brooks is a 5-round fighter, and he's an exceptionally process-driven fighter, and that can cause problems in a 3-round fight against somebody who can compete with him, if not beat him skill-wise.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's also the kind of fighter. The number of perfect rounds you have to fight as a fighter like Will Brooks goes down the more rounds you have, because the process kind of becomes perfected. If you look at a Floyd Mayweather fight, even a relatively close one like the Pacquiao fight was pretty close at first, and then you go down the stretch and Mayweather takes over. No matter how tough the opponent, a fighter like that figures out the best way to win and wins the rest of the fight that way. The only way that Floyd Mayweather have ever had close rounds in rounds 11 and 12 is because he knew he was ahead and basically just stopped fighting. And that's Will Brooks. That if you were to give Will Brooks a 7-round fight, he would probably beat every person in the division. You give him more time to work, he's going to find the way to beat you, and he's physically gifted enough that he's going to outlast you. He's got great stamina, never seems to slow down. And you also get the feeling that going the distance, he's a guy who would slow down. He would know he would have to slow down if he needed to conserve his energy more than other fighters.
Yeah, I mean, he's the kind of dude who loses a convincing first round to Marcin Held and gets and almost gets his knee torn off, and then basically 10-8s him the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I think that's what we said when we first came in the UFC. We're like, he's going to have a dangerous road to the title, but you get him in 5-round fights, he can hold the belt.
Yeah, exactly. Like he is a more damaging, more dangerous, better rounded, more athletic Benson Henderson.
Sure, that's actually a really good comparison. Absolutely.
Like a much more like where Benson Henderson filled in the gaps between things that he did with his kind of swagger and bullshit. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I want to make that very clear. Brooks fills it in with actual damaging offense.
He's got some swagger too.
Yeah. Oh, he's definitely got swagger. I love the fact that Will Brooks is not one of those dudes who like, you may not like the things that Will Brooks says, but he's going to say things. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. His personality is an aspect of his fight career, and I think it usually should be. So both of us picking Will Brooks over Alex Oliveira, but both of us thinking it could be Pretty interesting fight all the same. So looking forward to that one. Why don't we take one more break, Pat, and when we come back, we're going to have a little bit to discuss about one of the other, perhaps more underwhelming fights in this card, but I think we have an interesting angle from which to look at it and maybe a bit of a thematic discussion to have on that issue. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. The other fight we wanted to discuss from this card, Pat, was Cochran Diaz versus Andre Fili at featherweight. And this fight seemed to have an interesting narrative to us. It was Diaz, if you don't, I mean, there's actually a chance that some people listening aren't really familiar with these guys. Diaz is one of these sort of lesser Nova União fighters. The camp where Jose Aldo and Renan Barão train, and has had some decent wins over the past few years of his UFC career, has had some disappointing losses, and in all those fights has kind of looked like he has struggled to pull the trigger. He's not very aggressive. He's what you might call overcautious. And then he'll be facing Andre Fili, who also has some impressive wins and so on and so forth, but whose losses have almost always been the result of him being over-aggressive, not being able to dial that back. And so we kind of framed this matchup in our heads, and while we were discussing it beforehand, as a fight between discipline and absence of discipline, and both like being too disciplined and being not disciplined at all, and kind of a nice demonstration of how fighters who fall in the middle are better served than either of these two guys who fall on far ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, it's a fascinating contrast. Like, this is not, I don't think on paper, an especially interesting fight. I think especially because when you have a matchup between one fighter who is exceptionally disciplined and one who isn't, like, the outcome should be fairly straightforward. Like, I would expect Diaz to grab a hold of Fili in the clinch, repeatedly take him down, and just kind of work him over from the top. Work him over in the clinch, work him over from the top while avoiding getting hit with that one big shot that puts him out. It's an interesting contrast between the two of them, kind of personality-wise, though, that, like, Fili is just a dude who is always getting after it. Like, that is his whole thing. He is an offensive powerhouse. Like, in terms of pure offensive ability, he's one of the better featherweights out there. The problem is he has no defensive acumen whatsoever, either in terms of wrestling, grappling, or on the feet. And he has very little ability, it seems like, to stick to a predetermined game plan. Mm-hmm. So, like, he had some ideas about what he wanted to do against when he fought Yair Rodriguez in April, but he was just unable to stick to anything like consistent pressure. He just wanted to leap across the distance and throw at him. Like, he's too athletic for his own good, almost. Whereas Diaz, who is also like a really good athlete, has always been a really good athlete, Diaz just can't seem to bring himself to go that extra step, to pull the trigger, to really dig in and try to finish.
Yeah. It's like Andre Fili has this thing where to his advantage, he can do everything pretty well. He really can. He's a very well-rounded fighter, but it's kind of well-roundedness in opposition to effective fighting, because to a much less degree, and perhaps he's also a much better athlete and at a better camp and everything. But I've also said this about Beck Rawlings. She's a fighter who just can't see an opening without attacking it. And unlike someone like John Lineker, it's not even focused into like punch combinations. It's like if Beck Rawlings sees a head-arm throw, she's going to take it. To a slightly lesser degree, that's Andre Fili. If he thinks he can take you down, he's going to shoot for a takedown. Whether or not it's really a good idea, given your skill set, whether or not it's something that's in the game plan, if he thinks he can land a right hand, he's going to land it, and he will set up strikes and takedowns off of each other. If he thinks he can go for a submission, he will scramble with you on the ground longer than is advised. But the aggression, I'm actually not so certain as you that Cochran Diaz is like an easy pick in this fight, because discipline can take many forms. And we had a bit of a discussion before we began recording today about this. You kind of see Cochran Diaz as someone who is just supremely disciplined, and I think that carries an obvious positive connotation. But what discipline means is a little shaky, because I would agree that Cochran Diaz technically looks like a Novu União fighter. He looks like someone who does almost everything correctly. His technique is really solid. His triggers are well conditioned. He knows what he's supposed to do and when, and he doesn't put himself at risk. But he also often gives away rounds, because the kind of way that he has been disciplined, if that is what we're seeing, is just a supreme discipline. The way he has been disciplined is not necessarily the best way to win a fight. And there's a certain other, you can discipline a fighter to do any number of things. All that discipline really means for our purposes is kind of disobeying or overriding your natural compulsions and doing what doing what you've been taught. Being taught to do something that isn't necessarily instinctual. And sometimes pressing the action and exposing yourself to risk, playing a bit of a gambit, that can be something that it is worthwhile to discipline into your fighter. There are coaches out there who instill the discipline of winning rounds into their fighters, and are not just saying, Cochran Diaz would probably win a lot of street fights with no intervention and with unlimited time. But in the context of a combat sport, he gives away a lot of rounds. And Andre Fili doesn't really give away rounds. He just gets sort of blown up by exposing himself. But he also finishes a lot of his opponents. And so, again, that's what makes this fight interesting, even though I don't know if it'll even really play out in a fun way.
Yeah, I have no disagreements with any of that. I think Diaz has been disciplined to the point of risk aversion, which we have to bear in mind. And I think that's true of a lot of Nova União fighters. Like Jose Aldo is also a pretty risk-averse fighter. We saw that from his performance against Frankie Edgar. He barely kicked and just beat the crap out of him with a jab and a right hand, pretty much the entire fight. Jab, right hand, and footwork. Like, there is a tendency among Nova União fighters to be strategically disciplined to the fight itself without looking at the broader context of their careers. And I think that Diaz is the worst case example of that, while still being a really good fighter. He's somebody who just does not seem to have that extra gear to push into, or the ability to push himself into that extra gear when it's absolutely necessary to win rounds. So we saw this against Ricardo Lamas, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the quintessential Cochran Diaz performance, where he was really competitive. I think he won one round of that fight, but he just did not quite have what it took to put a stamp on it against a guy who does make mistakes, against a guy who can kind of be baited, and against a guy who, if not given an opportunity, is not especially dangerous. Like, if you screw up, Lamas is going to finish you. But Diaz, a guy who doesn't screw up, didn't give him anything to work with, but Diaz still didn't have what it took to push just a little bit harder safely.
Because he was more concerned with not giving Lamas anything to work with than he was with winning the fight.
Exactly.
Diaz is kind of, this will be a weird comparison. He's the Chad Laprise of Nova União, where this is very unfair to Chad Laprise, and I'm not going to stick by this statement, but Chad Laprise is kind of, he feels like what you'd get if you took all the stuff that Firas Zahabi wants a kickboxer to do and you kind of took out the personality of that person. It's just like a solid technical approach. And Cochran Diaz is kind of like the Nova União approach without the personality. That makes fighters like Jose Aldo and Renan Barão and who else is at Nova União right now? Eduardo Dantas. That makes them different from each other. He doesn't have that kind of fuck you attitude that makes Jose Aldo special. He doesn't have the willingness to stand his ground when need be in trade that makes Renan Barão special, or to leap across space to land punishing shots. He's just kind of the perfect Nova União fighter, and that is what makes him imperfect.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I think the Chad Laprise comparison is a really good one, where you look at what the guy does and you think that is exactly how that's supposed to look.
Yeah.
Given this particular template, he is exactly the template. But it's a reminder that, like, just living up to a template isn't enough.
Yeah, technical perfection is not enough.
And conversely, you look at Fili and having raw aggressiveness and everything that you need to be to like a warrior spirit almost. Like, that dude wants to get out there and fuck you up.
Yes.
And you look at a fighter and you're like, that's what I think a fighter should be. But conversely, there has to be something to temper that
Yeah.
with technical acumen, especially defensively. Like, you can't just go out there and sling shit all the time. You have to be able to take a step back, keep yourself safe, and understand your limitations.
You'd have
and
something very close to a perfect featherweight if you could combine these two guys. Like, they fall so far on opposite ends of that scale. If they could just meet in the middle, if Diaz could just open up a little more. He is very athletic. He seems powerful. He has a lot going for him.
Well, you know what the midpoint is between these two guys?
What's that?
It's Max Holloway.
Okay,
Max,
sure. Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. Somebody who is perfectly willing to stand there and bang it out with you, like you did with Ricardo Lamas in the last few seconds of that fight, which is just fucking madness.
One of the best things I've ever seen.
Yeah. Do you know how drunk I was for that? Like, I was out of my mind, blitzed, lit up. It was the coolest fucking thing I'd ever seen. Yeah, I realized that I tweeted that I thought that Holloway was the best featherweight on the planet after that, and I caught a lot of shit for that. I don't remember tweeting that.
Oh, I might actually agree with that. He's close.
Yeah, I would defend that take sober, but I was not thinking that deeply on it drunk.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that Holloway is the kind of midpoint between that. He's somebody who has an exceptional amount of technical acumen in basically everything that he does. He's not as accomplished a clinch fighter or a wrestler. Or offensive wrestler. I think that's fairly clear.
But there's a lot of polish to a game that is backed up by grit, by real fighter grit.
By grit, by finishing ability too. Like, obviously Holloway can finish you. Yeah, absolutely. That is all part of it. So does that make sense? Have we hit on something here, Connor?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to pick Andre Fili, though. I really do. I think because I would pick Cochran Diaz if he could stop Andre Fili. But I don't know that he can.
I don't think he has to. I think he's just going to kind of grind it out. I think he's going to land some shots at range, not get hit when it's going to look like every other Team Alpha Male Nova União fight has.
Maybe. I think it's a tall order to outgrind an Alpha Male fighter, though. To just like hold them down and out wrestle them. Even Andre Fili, who doesn't have the same wrestling chops as the rest of the team, he's a pretty good scrambler. So I think Diaz would probably have to climb into a dominant position and hold it, or he'd have to wrap up a submission.
See, Fili is a good scrambler, but like somebody like Carlos Condit, if you can establish top position on him, it's going to be hard for him to get back.
Yeah, maybe. Well, we have successfully made Andre Fili versus Cochran Diaz one of the more interesting fights on this card, at least in my mind. So I think that's quite an accomplishment to be proud of, Pat.
Interesting on paper. True of so many Fox Sports 1 matchups.
Isn't that true? Even last week's card, I think, was a little more interesting on paper than it was in action. And that happens so frequently.
Yeah, with that.
Yeah. So I guess that's about it for us. Pat? Yeah, huh?
What are you doing this week? What are you doing this week, Connor? Tell me what you're doing.
You're going to get at me first this time.
Yeah, do it.
I've got the same video stuff in the works. I have a lot of video stuff that I'm trying to put out. I know I said that last week. Still working on it. Was in Chicago all weekend, so I didn't get as much produced over the, but I'm supposed to work like 5 days a week, and I just can't seem to stick to that. I spend too much time doing stuff. So I'm still working on those videos. Looking forward to that. I got a video coming out on the boxing crouch, its development and its strengths and weaknesses as a stance, and then some other stuff. Not really sure quite yet. I'm not a great promoter, so it is what it is. I'll come up with something. I may do something on Will Brooks because I'm a big fan of his, and I'm interested to see him succeed in the UFC. So maybe I'll talk about the 5-round fighter and his slog through the marsh of 3-round matchups. What about you, Pat?
I got a couple of things. I have a preview of this weekend's card, which is coming out on Bleacher Report. My colleague Steven Rendina and I did a thing on Conor McGregor at UFC 205 and how he's kind of poised to transcend the UFC and become even bigger than he already is. Already the biggest draw in the history of the UFC. Let's see, what else am I doing? I don't know. I'll probably write another little op-ed later this week about the UFC 205 card itself. Yeah, I don't know, something along those lines. And then I will have a new episode of the Fall of Rome podcast out on Thursday or Friday. We're going to be looking this week at Roman Britain, the fall of Roman Britain, King Arthur, the coming of the Anglo-Saxons, all that sort of really interesting, good stuff. Going to be talking about catastrophe and disaster, more or less.
Actually, I'm going to be doing a new podcast too.
Ooh, what are you doing?
I haven't even recorded anything yet, but I guess there's no reason not to tease it. Brittany and I, my girlfriend Brittany, people who know my stuff from way back may remember her from the other half of the sexiness versus deadliness previews we used to do, where I would make fight picks based on analysis and she would make picks based on attractiveness, and the numbers were embarrassingly close. So people always thought she was very funny. She is very funny, and we're going to watch movies together. And do a discussion. So we're going to do a show. We're planning on calling it Good Movie, Bad Movie. Each episode featuring a movie with a plus 80% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a movie with a minus 50% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and discussing both of those. So should be fun. Other stuff going on. Who knows, Pat? Maybe like your Fall of Rome podcast, it will just instantly blow up more than Heavy Hands has. It will just be a more accessible subject matter, and suddenly people will care about it, even though they've been slowly trickling into Heavy Hands over the last 2 years.
I like it. I like it. We can make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for listening. That was today's episode of Heavy Hands. We hope you enjoyed all that discussion as much as we did. And find us on social media. That's right, I had something else to say. At Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H, that's me. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. I wanted to let everyone know the show is also on the Google Play Store now as well, in addition to iTunes and Stitcher. And of course, you can directly download each episode from Libsyn. Those are usually posted on the Bloody Elbow posts about the new episodes. And you can find the show on YouTube on the MMANation.com channel. So shouldn't have any difficulty finding the show. Down the line, we may even get on SoundCloud, but that is an additional fee. So we'll see. Anyway, thank you again for joining us. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This was, of course, Heavy Hands.